37th ASEAN Summit began Thursday under the chairmanship of Vietnam with a focus on recovery from COVID-19 and the bloc's role in the post-pandemic world. Also high on the agenda is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. The free trade deal between ASEAN's 10 member states and 5 outside partners should be signed after years of negotiation. So, what are the implications of a deal that will cover 30% of the world's population and GDP? What other pressing issues are on the agenda? And where does China fit into ASEAN's future growth? To discuss these issues and more, I'm joined by Mr. Liu Zhiqin, Senior Fellow at the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies, Renmin University of China, Professor Tan Ki Giap, Chairman of Singapore's National Committee for Pacific Economic Cooperation, Professor Suyai, Professor of Economics at Keio University, and Professor Titinan Pontsirak from Chulalongkorn University. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Wang Mengmang. Well, apparently lots of issues on the table, so why don't we begin with one item that could see a major breakthrough. During his opening ceremony speech, Vietnamese Prime Minister Nguyen Quoc Phuc announced that ASEAN will officially ratify the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. I mean, this is a huge deal, literally and symbolically. It's taken years in the making, and it will be the largest trade pact in the world once ratified. I want to get your thoughts on this. Let's begin with Mr. Liu. What are your expectations for the RCEP?
I think this event is so important for the region, especially for the Asian countries. You know that this negotiation and friendly talks last almost 8 years. Now come to the light of the success. So exciting point for all countries at the moment. But we see that this RCEP negotiation will be very, very successful and also very promising for all countries participated in the negotiation and in the whole processing of the economic recovery. It will definitely have great meaning for the recovery in this region, not only, of course, not only for the Asian countries, but as well for the whole world. You know, the Asian countries and also the RCEP covered almost 1/3 of the population and the GDP of the world. So it's a very important role in the world economic recovery. So we see and we attach great importance to the RCEP. I think the event took place in Vietnam also has a significant meaning to all participants. We hope that the good success will be maintained and also will be achieved sooner or later this week.
And of course, economic recovery is one of the priorities for ASEAN countries and its partners. So, Professor Giap, how do you think that the signing of the RCEP agreement will help address economic challenges posed by the pandemic and also to drive economic recovery?
Well, I think the RCEP is a very significant gesture for the following 3 reasons for Asia and to ASEAN in particular. Significant reason number 1, with this global protectionism, signing of RCEP at this time will further confirm the rule-based globalization process will go on. And this is why Asia is the area of growth. Now, for second reason, the US-China trade friction, multinational from China, some of them operating in China, including those from Korea, Japan, Europe, and including those from China, they are moving to ASEAN. So it is an important opportunity for ASEAN to quickly have this concluded. And now with the COVID-19, growth has been derailed in some ASEAN countries. So this signing of RCEP, for these 3 significant reasons, the timing is absolutely crucial. And we are looking forward to it, that at last, there is ASEAN 10+5. Although India dropped out, but still, I think ASEAN 10+5 for the RCEP is an important step that Asia has seen, and it will help towards harmonize with CPTPP and eventually to FTAP. I think this is something ought to be welcomed, and if we can conclude it in these few days' time, we ought to celebrate for all those, not just in Asia, but all over the world.
Of course, this agreement hasn't come easily. Malaysia's Trade Minister Muhammad Azmin Ali was quoted as saying that after 8 years of negotiating with blood, sweat and tears, we have finally come to the moment where we will seal this RCEP agreement. So, Professor Pansudhirak, let me get your thoughts on this. Why do you think it's been so difficult to reach an agreement, and what are the major sticking points?
Well, you know, you can see that the multilateral trading system has broken down. So we're seeing a kind of an unraveling of the rules-based international order. This is why RCEP at this time is important. It's taken a long time because, you know, there are a lot of issues, there are a lot of protectionist interests. In fact, India has pulled out, so I think the finalization of RCEP was trying to get India to come back in. And of course, within RCEP, you can see that countries within RCEP have a lot of geopolitical tensions and issues between China and certain ASEAN countries, for example, also Japan. So RCEP should be seen not just as a geo-economic vehicle for trade liberalization, but also a geopolitical platform to discuss tensions and issues. I think that now that we have RCEP, you know, it will be a signature accomplishment for Vietnam, for ASEAN. This is an ASEAN-driven vehicle. Last year in 2019, Thailand was a chair, and Thailand was able to engineer, push through the AOIP, the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific. So I think this year the crowning achievement for the ASEAN chairmanship under Vietnam will be RCEP. And it's significant because, you know, now you look around, pandemic, World Trade Organization kind of breaking down. We have a lot of bad news. So RCEP generate some kind of momentum and maybe a little bit of confidence for the countries in the region to cooperate, to generate growth and cooperation. And that could also have spillover, positive spillover effects for geopolitical tensions that we're seeing around the region.
Yeah. And let me get your thoughts, Professor Shirai. The other two professors mentioned that India backed out from this plan last year, and Japan has also been hesitant about joining this trade deal without India. Could you explain to us India's continued lack of interest in the agreement and why this concerns Japan?
Well, I think, you know, Japan and the U.S. and India and Australia have a very close diplomatic relationship. So maybe Japan wanted to involve India, you know, to have a power balance in the region. But having said that, in terms of economic-wise, RCEP is very important for Japan, even excluding India, because Japan already have a, you know, this trade agreement with the, you know, with the TPP-11. Some of the ASEAN countries like Singapore and Malaysia, and also Australia and New Zealand. And the most important element of RCEP is the participation of China. So China is definitely very important, given the growing importance in global GDP, global trade, and China's consumption market is growing, and China is the biggest export destination for Japan. So if the China can get rid of the import tariff on Japanese automobile and parts, that is a significant boost for the Japanese manufacturers. So from Japanese point of view, it's a very good deal. And also, of course, we have to prepare for the cheaper product from China. But this RCEP accepted that Japan can exclude the this tariff cut with regards to the very sensitive agricultural products such as rice and beef and pork. So overall, I think it's a very good deal for Japan.
Well, as we know that the world is in this fight together against COVID-19 and, of course, economic recovery and making sure that people around the world have equal access to a vaccine, safe and effective vaccine, is also a priority for ASEAN leaders and their partners. And there have been questions about the RCEP's cohesiveness, saying that perhaps voices from individual countries are even louder than the bloc as a whole. Do you agree, Mr. Liu, on this? And some analysts say that maybe, you know, China plays a major role in the draft of the rule of law, the rules of Asia-Pacific trade.
We know from the very beginning of the negotiating that the RCEP, there are still many different voices all over the world, not only in countries in this region, but also some countries that has no direct relation with the region. They have already wrongly explained the meaning and the purpose of China's participating and also China's enthusiasm in the RCEP. So this is something that, as we see that some countries try to politicalizing of this issue, this economic issue. You know, this RCEP is so important for Asian countries, especially the Asian countries have met so heavy challenges beside all these problems we have met. So the challenges remain still that unsolved at the moment, especially for the economic slowdown and also poverty problems and the environmental questions in all the countries. Because in Asian countries, beside Japan and ROK, all the countries are still developing countries. So we need a unity, we need a unified program and also policy to stimulate and also promote our economy. So China is the second largest economy in the world. Also, China is a real Asian country. So we have very close relations and contact with all Asian countries without any big problems from culture, religious and political issues. So we have very good understanding between each other. So that's why that China can play really very important role in the developing economy for all countries. In the past 20 years, we show that China has made great contributions to support, to help all the regional countries that to develop their own economy. And of course, one of the major features we have to say that all this assistance and support from China, or China's assistance in the economic development, has no any political purpose. So this is very well accepted and understood by the regional countries. So this is a very important, significant also step for China that to take part in this negotiation and become one of the major partner for this RCEP, because China really can do a lot to help other countries' economic development.
Yeah, Professor Pansud Hirag, as the second largest economy in the world, do you think that it's fair for China to have a greater say in forming a major trade agreement like this?
Well, I think it's not in doubt that China now is the main locomotive for regional economic growth. You know, without India, RCEP will be China heavy. There will be, of course, Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, but no India. And this is significant because, you know, China now will have a greater weight, a greater role. And it's important for China to see also the smaller countries, the smaller economies in Southeast Asia and ASEAN, that they're still developing. It's best to kind of reach out to some of these economies and remember that, you know, this is not a gold standard. I mean, RCEP is not like the CPTPP, Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. The standards of liberalization are lower. You know, services trade is not as extensive. RCEP is, you know, it's WTO consistent, but I'm not sure how much plus WTO it is. It has to be substantial and comprehensive. It also has to have balance. I think with India, there would have been more balance. So without India, I think China has to also be mindful and careful in dealing with the smaller economies, because you know, China does not want to alienate these economies in ASEAN, for example. So there's no doubt that China now is the main locomotive for growth, but this also has to be goodwill and cooperation genuine.
It's true. While ASEAN member states have different stages of development, for example, it features some of the poorest countries in the world and also some of the richest. So against the backdrop of rising protectionism and confidence in globalization, the world is facing a more complex situation than ever before. And in this, unity and integration seems more important than ever. And earlier, we spoke to Mr. Zhang Shaogang, Vice Chairman of China Council for the Promotion of International Trade, and he talked about regional economic integration prospect in Southeast Asia and East Asia. Let's take a listen.
About CGTN FTA negotiations. This is a trilateral economic arrangement among 3 countries. The negotiations started in November 2012 and has held 16 rounds meetings since then. as this negotiation is carried on almost simultaneously with RCEP negotiation, the three countries have come up to an understanding that the three countries' FTA negotiation should build upon RCEP and reach the outcome of RCEP Plus. In other words, this means to compare with RCEP, the CGK FTA should be higher in terms of level of liberalization and be broader in terms of coverage of sectors so as to reflect its own unique value. In this regard, there gives rise to a sequencing issue, namely, RCEP should conclude first, followed by CGK FTA. Since the RCEP negotiation will possibly come to the end this year, I'm quite convinced that the CGK will accelerate their pace of negotiation and hopefully pack up the agreement next year based on RCEP. When CGK FTA is established, the East Asia market will be further open, and the three countries' cooperation will be further guaranteed by a sound and a comprehensive rule-based legal system.
As we just heard Professor Shirai, Mr. Zhang talked about two agreements. One is RCEP and the other is the trilateral trade agreement between China, Japan, and the ROK. Now, will the RCEP promote further regional economic integration, particularly among China, Japan, and ROK, and of course within Southeast Asia?
Well, I think, just having this free trade negotiation among Japan, China, Korea means a lot to us because all of us are already in the RCEP members. And Japan already have a trade agreement with the ASEAN countries. I think the important thing is whether U.S. will eventually participate in the this RCEP, and then eventually this evolve into the greater regions such as APEC. If U.S. is included together with China and other countries, this will be benefiting us and all the countries in the regions. So if the U.S. is included, this RCEP account for 50% of global GDP. So let's see what Mr. Biden's stance will be if he's elected as a president next year, whether he's willing to participate in this kind of trade agreement with Asian regions.
Well, Professor Gap, what are your thoughts on this? Professor Shirai just mentioned that a new administration from the U.S. could bring changes to the RCEP agreement, expanding it to include the U.S. What's the prospect of that happening?
Well, I think our founding father Lee Kuan Yew has said that all along, that the U.S. should return to Asia Pacific, to return to Asia, in particular in terms of trade and investment. So I think we hope to see a change, that the return of the United States to Asia in trade and investment, but not in a militant building up. And ASEAN members, there's a prerequisite for growth in ASEAN for the RCEP, the South China Sea must be peaceful. And I think the Foreign Minister of Indonesia has said that we do not want to see the escalation of military tension in South China Sea. So in this case, I think if U.S. can have a change of mind and coming back to CPTPP, which they were leading, and therefore I think this is a higher quality free trade agreement, together with the RCEP, we're going to make sure that between CPTPP and RCEP, they are consistent, so there can be a pathway to the bigger FTA-AP, the Free Trade Agreement of Asia Pacific. I think that will set a good example and rebuild the momentum of a multilateral globalization, which is getting a heart beating now. So therefore, I think the timing of RCEP, and mind you, RCEP is supposed to be ASEAN-centric. Yes, China is an important player in ASEAN because ASEAN and China, we are each other's biggest trading partner. But you don't forget, OECD country, according to the recent study we did for the World Bank, OECD country in terms of trade and investment is 3.7 times more bigger than China in ASEAN. And therefore, we would like to see that major economic power will be in ASEAN to balance China but not to counter China. So we welcome all major economic power to come to ASEAN, especially, don't forget, ASEAN has a population of half of Chinese, 1.4 billion. We have 600 over million. So therefore, in terms of e-commerce, in terms of digital economy, there's full of potential, not to mention the rising middle class. And therefore, I think RCEP is a very important milestone to achieve so that we can see CPTPP, hopefully, with President Biden coming in, they have a second thought. And it's a bit unfortunate that India choose to not to be included in this process. In the longer term, I'm sure India will find out they actually lose out for not being part of the RCEP. And we look towards India to change their mind. And I think we have to engage India. And you understand that Japan and Australia and India, they want to be the second factory of the world and getting ASEAN countries to participate. I think that's fine. Let's have a healthy competition. It is good for ASEAN. But I think what is more important is to promote rule-based multilateral trade and investment through WTO. And this way, I think China can play a leadership role in helping to lead the reforms in the World Trade Organization. And we look towards China's leadership in this, and we are very happy to see the Japanese leadership in CPTPP. And therefore, I think for ASEAN and for Asia, believe me, the best is yet to be.
Well, Professor Giap mentioned the South China Sea. Of course, stakes are high in the South China Sea. China and ASEAN partners have been competing claims to the waters, which see, trillions of dollars worth of maritime trade each year, and it, of course, boasts abundant natural resources. And Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said earlier this year that he was hoping to see the completion of the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea by 2021. Mr. Liu, can we expect any major progress on this front?
Yes, I think in the past years that many countries are very concerned about the dispute in the South China Sea. And some countries and political persons always try to accuse China's purpose in this area. But as we announced that China is a peaceful country, that we hope that to be peacefully coexistent with all countries, especially when talking about the economic recovery. I think a peaceful coexistence is more important than anything. Without the peace, without the recovery. This is a very simple principle for everybody to understand. And the South China Sea, the dispute could be limited, not in the RCEP negotiation, because RCEP is still economic cooperation between all the countries. We hope that China and all other countries will to be more friendly and also transparent to discuss all questions and problems. We hope that all the countries outside of this region should not try to benefit from the dispute from this region, and also they should do something positive to support the cooperation within this area. We know that we hope we have the more cooperation, not sharply competition. So just like some professor said, that we need a healthy competition. So in this way, we don't need any provocation in this issue. So actually, as our Foreign Minister Wang Yi announced that all the time, that in many occasions, that all disputes and the questions could be discussed and negotiated, not through any other foreign influences in this area. So we hope that all these questions could be discussed so friendly, so effectively, and come to a conclusion sooner or later next year. That will benefit all countries concerned in this region. Some countries still trying to get some cake from this dispute. This is wrong. So all these countries in Asia, they like peace, they like have more cooperation in this area, because the people are hoping that to have a better life, not the others.
Yeah, and tensions, unfortunately, are running high between the U.S. and China over the increased U.S. naval presence and blacklisting of Chinese entities over alleged involvement in building and militarizing artificial islands in the region. Professor Pansudhirak, will these issues be addressed at the ASEAN Summit this year? And also on a broader scale, with political change in the U.S., are South China Sea tensions likely to rise?
Well, with the new incoming presidency of President-elect Joe Biden, I think the atmosphere will change. There will be opportunities, I think, to tone down the rhetoric and perhaps to reorient the U.S. role in the region. Maybe we can see a bit calmer tensions. The tensions could be calmer, and perhaps more cooperation and less confrontation. So that would bode well for regional peace and security. I think that this area, the region, is an intersection of prosperity and insecurity. So on the one hand, I think it's very clear that China plays a leading role economically, politically. At the same time, I think China should realize that also not to overplay its role. So somehow the South China Sea, I think it will be incorporated into the meetings and discussions this month, but probably likely will spill over into next year. I think RCEP will be the main achievement, and that's a lot already. RCEP will provide impetus and incentive for CGK, for trade liberalization there, and also for CPTPPs to maybe somehow streamline. We have this overlapping kind of trade liberalization in the region. But you can see that now East Asia is moving on. East Asia is moving on beyond APEC, is coming into its own, and China is at the front and center of it. But the other countries in ASEAN, for example, also want to be on the train as well.
Yeah. Well, Professor Shirai, let me get one last thought from you. To what extent will maybe stronger trade ties and greater connectivity within the ASEAN bloc and its partners in Asia, for example, China, Japan, and ROK, help bridge the political differences?
Yes, so we have this political difference and historical relationship, and we have also territorial issue, not only in South Sea, but also between Japan and China. So I think, this kind of negotiation should really first focus on economic prosperity and economic improvement, and gradually by fostering this trustworthy relationship, we could start to talk about political, territorial issues. But I think at this moment, it's important to focus on economic issues, economic development.
Yeah. And let's take a look at the prospect. Professor Gap, next year's ASEAN chairmanship will go to Brunei. What do we expect? In what ways do you think Brunei will champion during its chairmanship?
Well, I think for the Brunei's dynamic leadership, we can expect that addressing the digital divide, how to make a digital economy to be an important driver of growth. And I also think that Brunei, as one of the members of South China Sea, which have disputed that, I think ASEAN countries are very careful not to be drawn into this military tension. I think you can see they're very cautious. Therefore, I think Brunei, especially a small country like Brunei, and they want to have a rule-based trading, they want to have services. So therefore, I think this ASEAN would have to grow at a higher level, because the globalization divide may not be as worse as digital divides.
Right.
And we look towards Brunei's leadership next year.
The divisions are still there, and it takes all the wisdom to try to bring them together. Thank you so much. Let me thank our panel, Mr. Liu Zhijin, Professor Tan Ki Gap, and also Professor Titinan Pantuhirak and Professor Shirai. Appreciate your insights. That'll do it for this edition of Dialogue. I'm Wang Mengmang. Thanks for watching.